I'm sorry for that technical difficulty, ladies and gentlemen. I was disconnected from my Procaster, and I'm going to need a faster computer. But I'm going to try to resume what I was trying to talk about here in just a few seconds, as soon as I get everything back up to date. And we are going to go, as I said, to a newsreel from Nazi Germany. You see, those that are trying to take our firearms away from us have an agenda, and I want to show you what socialism means in action, and we're going to go to this reel.
Das deutsche Danzig war durch das Diktat von Versailles zu einem Freistaat unter der Kontrolle des Völkerbundes gemacht worden. Abgeschnitten vom deutschen Mutterland wurde es das Ziel der polnischen Eroberungsgelüste. Die Drohungen Polens wurden unter dem Schutz des englischen Garantieversprechens immer unerträglicher, sodass die wehrfähigen Männer Danzigs die Grenzen ihres Heimatlandes mit der Waffe in der Hand gegen einen polnischen Zugriff schützen mussten. Bei diesem Dienst wurde mancher Familienvater durch polnische Schüsse aus dem Hinterhalt niedergestreckt. Hier die Beisetzung des vom polnischen Banden erschossenen SA-Mannes Josef Wessel. Noch schlimmer tobte der polnische Terror gegen die wehrlosen Volksdeutschen, die das Versailler Diktat gegen ihren Willen zu polnischen Staatsbürgern gemacht hatte. Zu Tausenden flüchteten sie vor den polnischen Mordbanden auf reichsdeutsches Gebiet. Ihre zurückgebliebenen Höfe wurden von den Polen planmäßig verwüstet und in Brand gesteckt. Die unerträglichen Provokationen gingen allmählich so weit, dass sogar deutsches Reichsgebiet nicht mehr verschont blieb. Nach dem Handstreich auf den Reichssender Gleiwitz beschossen die Polen eines Tages sogar die offene Stadt Beuthen mit Artilleriefeuer. Mitten im Frieden schlugen polnische Granaten und Bomben in die Wohnhäuser der ahnungslosen Bevölkerung.
Wurden wir plötzlich durch eine schreckliche Detonation aus dem Schlafgedecke. Wir sprangen alle drei zugleich, Frau und der Sohn aus dem Bett. Und ich eilte nach Tier. Ich schaute nach den Fliegern, da entfernten sie sich in Richtung der polnischen Grenze. Es mochten 5 oder 6 Stücke gewesen sein. Was die angerichtet haben, das sehen Sie an Hause.
englischen Heuchlern als eine besonnene und disziplinierte Haltung bezeichnet. Sie wollten ihrem polnischen Bundesgenossen den Rücken stärken, um Deutschland jeden Fall herauszufordern und im Interesse der englischen Weltmacht jetzt auf Kosten anderer Völker einen Zweiten Weltkrieg betreiben. Sie heuchelten vor aller Welt ihre Bereitschaft, deutsche Schicksalsfragen auf dem Verhandlungswege lösen zu wollen. 20 Jahre lang hatte England alle friedlichen Vermittlungsvorschläge abgelehnt. Jetzt, in Zeiten schwerster polnischer Bedrohung, erklärte sich nunmehr am 1. September seine Unabhängigkeit. Der Völkerbundskommissar Professor Burkhardt verließ sein Amtsgebäude. Zum ersten Mal wehten auf den öffentlichen Gebäuden Danzigs die Hakenkreuzfahnen. Aber noch befindet sich in der Stadt das polnische Postgebäude, in dem sich bewaffnete Banden verschanzt hatten. Männer der Danziger Heimwehr räuchern im Schutz eines Panzerwagens diesen gefährlichen Schlupfwinkel aus. Danziger Freiheitskundgebung hatte der Führer die Männer des Deutschen Reichstages einberufen. Vor aller Welt verkündete er, dass er 2 Tage vergeblich auf einen polnischen Unterhändler zur Besprechung der deutschen Vermittlungsvorschläge gewartet habe und nun deutsche Kanonen auf alle polnischen Angriffe antworten. Zur gleichen Zeit zogen bereits die ersten deutschen Truppen ins befreite Danzig ein. Überall im Reich wurden Vorbereitungen getroffen, um den Kriegsdrohungen Englands und seiner Vasallen zu begegnen. Der Luftschutz wurde aufgerufen. Jugend bei der Arbeit, um die Skulpturen des berühmten Pergamon-Altars gegen Luftangriffe zu sichern. Unsere Flak sichert den deutschen Luftraum. Die Reservejahrgänge wurden zu den Fahrern berufen. Die deutsche Rüstungsindustrie arbeitet mit Hochdruck.
Do you see, ladies and gentlemen, what I mean about socialism in action? The Germans, they had plenty of armaments, and basically what I've shown you here is a propaganda film, because it wasn't the Poles that attacked Germany. It was the other way around. And how do I connect this with school shootings here in America? You see, the people in Nazi Germany were thugs and terrorists. And the same people here that are trying to disarm us are thugs and terrorists. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find an article that's very interesting, and I'm going to bring this up. And it's about this shooter in Connecticut. And if you bear with me, we'll get to it. I'm sorry for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to bring it up. See, those people that are focusing on what happened here are focusing on that guns are evil and guns are bad, and that we have to disarm the American people to somehow keep everybody safe. And I'm going to bring up an interesting article, and I've only found a couple links to this because it's something that's not being focused on, and I believe that it should be, because there's other things that are happening that go along with this senseless tragedy. And this comes from crimetime.com, and we're going to read the article. Connecticut school shooter may have had personality disorder, brother says. The man suspected of killing his mother and then gunning down more than 24 people Friday at the Connecticut elementary school where she taught may have suffered from a personality disorder, law enforcement officials said. They believe Adam Lanza, 20, killed his mother at their home before driving her car to Sandy Hook Elementary School and carrying out the massacre and killing herself. His older brother, 24-year-old Ryan Lanza of Hoboken, New Jersey, told authorities that his brother was believed to suffer from a personality disorder and to be somewhat autistic. You see, there's always an agenda behind everything, ladies and gentlemen. Our politicians, with their pea-brain little minds, will once again try to propagandize the American people into believing that guns are always the problem, and that somehow if you give them the power to eliminate our rights, that they'll make everybody safe and secure. Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, had this to say: people who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither liberty nor security. And he knew, as well as the rest of the men that founded this nation, exactly what he was talking about. Only communists and those that seek total power and total control wish to disarm their citizens. And that is a fact. That is a fact of history. That is something that cannot be denied. German people disarmed. 55 million dead under Adolf Hitler. In the Soviet Union, their people disarmed. 20 million dead under Joseph Stalin. Under Mao Zedong in communist China, almost 120 million people dead, ladies and gentlemen. Then a great majority of the American people will say, well, that can't happen here. Our government would never do that to us. And I have a question to ask you. Are you so sure that they won't do the same thing to us once they have the power and they have the control? You look at news articles today, and you can go all across the internet, and you can witness the arrogance and the brutality of our police officers in the United States. Because they believe that the American people are so scared and so apathetic that they can do basically anything that they want. And they are running amok, and they're running rampant and running roughshod over everybody in this country. Because the American people simply will not stand up for their rights. I was watching a post today, reading a post today on the internet concerning this school shooting, and I can't remember which website it was from. But I saw the usual propaganda. I saw the usual acting out of emotions, not acting on intelligence, where certain people want to blame gun owners for this tragedy, calling those of us that own firearms the gun crazies, and that somehow we have to be put down and put in our place. And I'm not going to be put down, and I'm not going to be put in my place, because those people are severely misinformed on the issues. What I'm going to try to do again, if you'll give me a second, is I'm going to try to bring something else up, and I hopefully that my computer, excuse me, will cooperate with me. As the man that's on this network that I'm on told me that I have to get a faster computer for everything to work a little bit better, and I'm trying to work on that, so I just ask everybody to be patient with me. This is another very important thing that I believe that the American people need to watch, and for those on this network need to watch. It's been broadcasted before, but I believe it should be broadcasted again. And I'm going to try to get this to play on my slow little computer here. But here it goes. It's Eric Holder on gun control.
They are saturated in the media and in entertainment, or by the entertainment industry, with violence. And I think too many of our young people, in particular our young men, are fascinated with violence, and in particular fascinated with guns. And what we need to do is change the way in which people think about guns, especially young people, and make it something that's not cool, that it's not acceptable, it's not hip to carry a gun anymore. In the way in which we've changed our attitudes about cigarettes, you know, when I was growing up, people smoked all the time. I mean, both my parents did. But over time, we changed the way in which people thought about smoking, and so now we have people who cower outside of buildings and kind of smoke in private and don't want to admit it. And that's what I think we need to do with guns. Really change the way in which people think about them, think about guns. Now, this is not going to be something that's very easy to do, because we are, quite frankly, fighting something that appears, you know, every day on television, on the radio, in our popular music, in movies that these kids are exposed to. It will be an effort that will entail things that I'm really not familiar with. I think I'm a pretty good lawyer, but we need to get really innovative, creative things that are going to grab the attention of these kids and change, as I said, the way in which they think about guns. And so what I've asked is that the creative community in Washington, those ad agencies that create these snappy ads and make me buy things that I don't really need, devote that talent in a more constructive way so we can get at the minds of these young people. This informational campaign, I've also called on the newspapers and the television stations to devote to us time and space so that we can get these ads, so we can use these spots, and not to give us 1, 2 o'clock in the morning ads when nobody's watching, but at the time when people, particularly young people, are watching television, so that when they're watching, you know, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or Martin or whatever else they watch, and yeah, I watch those things once in a while, so that they'll see these ads and they'll be grabbed by these ads. I've also asked people who have an influence over the youngsters, entertainers, athletes, to be involved in this program as well. But not only them, community leaders, Jesse Jackson, Mayor Barry, people who have credibility with young people should be on the television, on the radio, as much as we possibly can, and telling these youngsters that it's wrong to carry a gun, and that if you have information about people who are carrying guns, you've got to share that with Chief Thomas and with his people as well. I've also asked the school board to make a part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way. We also want to have a hotline that we will set up and have the number of that hotline that we just go out there, and that would be something that people would have emblazoned in their minds, so that when they see a gun or become familiar about the facts of a gun crime, they would call that hotline and pass that information on. We want to have, as part of the gun initiative, though, an informational campaign.
This was said by Eric Holder way back in 1995. This speech was given, ladies and gentlemen. Is it any coincidence that this man became Attorney General? He is blatantly against the United States Constitution. He is blatantly against gun ownership. And he's trying to use public schools to propagandize the American people, particularly the children of this nation, who still don't, in my opinion, have the intellectual capacity to fully understand what is going on. To tell them lies, tell them total falsehoods. And to encourage people to report people that carry firearms. Well, that happened in Nazi Germany, ladies and gentlemen. In no way am I disparaging this tragedy that happened in Connecticut. In no way do I disparage any tragedy where a gun is involved and it involves the loss of human life. But we have a myriad of gun laws already on the books. States have more gun laws on their books than the federal government has itself. Why are they not enforcing the laws that they already have? The answer is quite clear. They seek to disarm the American people, and they seek to do it in any means necessary, and the people that run our government will use this tragedy and exploit this tragedy to the fullest political extent. As I said before, I will quote to you the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And when they're talking about the security of a free state, it does not mean the state of Wisconsin, or the state of California, or the state of Florida. It means a state of being, that freedom cannot exist unless the people are armed. The Supreme Court of the United States has made it abundantly clear, case after case after case, that the right to own firearms is an individual right that is guaranteed to every man, woman, and child in the United States. And for those of you who don't know what a militia is, the United States Senate, some 25 years ago, codified into law what a militia is. The militia consists of two parts. The active militia, which means the National Guard and the reserves, and the inactive militia, which consists of every able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 64 years of age. That's right, America. You are part of the militia if you are an able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 64 years of age. And under the law, you should have and are required to own a firearm to protect this nation and to protect yourselves from the tyranny that's coming. Because it's coming, ladies and gentlemen, and it's coming fast. These people are not interested in your safety or your security. They're not interested in your well-being. What they're interested in is the surrender of the sovereignty of this nation to the control of the United Nations and making us a slave in their global plantation. I find it hard to believe that the American people are so ignorant of history. What makes us think that we're anybody special? That bad things can't happen here in our country. The Jews, when Adolf Hitler took power, didn't believe anything bad could happen to them. And it did. The Chinese, when the communists took power, the majority of them didn't believe anything bad could happen to them. But it did. The communists, when they took over the Soviet Union, weren't as violent at first. It took them many years to accomplish their goals there. But they are accomplishing their goals here, ladies and gentlemen, because Eric Holder and Barack Obama, George Bush, Dick Cheney, Al Gore, and all the rest of them, they're nothing but traitors to the United States of America. And very subtly and very slowly, right under your nose, they're working for the destruction of the United States. Our founding fathers made it quite clear in their writings what it means to own firearms, and it doesn't have anything to do with hunting or even protecting your wife or your children or your property in your home. The sole reason the American people are given the right to own firearms is to protect themselves from an overreaching government, and a government that can become tyrannical. And our government is becoming more and more tyrannical every day, ladies and gentlemen. There are 10 planks to the Communist Manifesto, and they just fulfilled the 9th plank. We have socialized medicine, and the only thing left for them to do to fully turn us into a socialist nation is to disarm the American people. And I believe once again it would be quite appropriate. My website went down on me. and I'm sorry for that. And I'm going to try to get back my page here. And I don't know why things are not working very right tonight. But as I said, just bear with me. And we're going to go to a document, my documents, because I believe that the listeners need a refresher on what exactly is happening in the United States and in the world. And I'm going to go to my documents. Just give me a second to bring them up. And I'll get them loaded. And we're going to talk about what is exactly going on and how this shooting is connected to a much larger goal. And I've got to find it. So please bear with me. I am going to bring up Public Law 87-297, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to bring up Public Law 87-297 in my documents. This document was signed by President Kennedy in 1961. For those of you that believe President John F. Kennedy was a good and decent president, I submit that he wasn't. He signed a bill into law that effectively disarms the American people on paper. And we're going to go down and we're going to try to read as much of this as we can. But as I said, this is Public Law 87-297. It was signed on September 26, 1961, and it established the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, being enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Title I, short title, Purpose and Definitions. This act may be cited as the Arms Control and Disarmament Act. An ultimate goal of the United States is a world which is free from the scourge of war and the dangers and burdens of armaments. And when they're talking about that, ladies and gentlemen, they are talking about your firearms, because they defined what an armament was. It means not only nuclear weapons, but it means armaments in general, in which the use of force has been subordinated to the rule of law and which international adjustments to a changing world are achieved peacefully. It is the purpose of this act to provide impetus towards this goal by creating a new agency of peace to deal with the problem of reduction and control of armaments, looking toward ultimate world disarmament. You see, ladies and gentlemen, that is the sole goal and purpose of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives since 1961. A world they were looking towards where we'd all be ultimately disarmed. Arms control and disarmament policy, being an important aspect of foreign policy, must be consistent with national security policy as a whole. The formulation and implementation of United States arms control and disarmament policy in a manner which will promote the national security can be best ensured by a central organization charged by statute with primary responsibility for this field. This organization must have a position within the government that it can provide to the President, the Secretary of State, other officials of the executive branch, and the Congress with recommendations concerning United States arms control and disarmament policy, and can assess the effect of these recommendations upon our foreign policies, our national security policies, and our economy. This organization must have the capacity to provide the essential scientific, economic, political, military, psychological, and technical information upon which realistic arms control and disarmament policy must be based. It must be able to carry out the following primary functions. And I'm going to pause there a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. Do you just recall the video that I played by Eric Holder? And I will quote again what it says here. The economic, political, military, and psychological and technical information upon which realistic arms control and disarmament policy must be based. You see that there is a psychological element here. As Eric Holder said, we must brainwash the American people into thinking that gun ownership is quote-unquote uncool or unhip. And he knew exactly what he was talking about, because as Attorney General, he knows that Public Law 87-297 exists, and he's working to enact all of its provisions. Conduct, support, and coordination of research for arms control and disarmament policy formulation. The preparation for and management of United States participation in international negotiations in the arms control and disarmament field. That's where your UN Small Arms Treaty is coming from, ladies and gentlemen. That is why Hillary Clinton is working so diligently in the United States to push the UN Small Arms Treaty, because she's working to enact provisions of Public Law 87-297. And I have the law right here in front of me. And if you do not believe that this is true, go to the library and request Public Law 87-297, because it's in the federal code books. And you can read it black and white, plain as day, for yourself. The dissemination and coordination of public information concerning arms control and disarmament, and the preparation for operation of, or as appropriate, direction of United States participation in such control systems as may become part of United States arms control and disarmament activities. Definitions as used in this act. Terms arms control and disarmament mean the identification, verification, inspection, limitation, control, reduction, or elimination of armed forces and armaments of all kinds, ladies and gentlemen. All kinds. That includes your deer rifle. That includes your shotgun. That includes the pistol that you carry in your pickup truck or in your car, or you carry concealed in your purse. This law was passed and signed by President Kennedy in 1961. Under international agreement, including the necessary steps taken under such as agreement to establish an effective system of international control, or to create and strengthen international organizations for the maintenance of peace. The term government agency means any executive department, commission, agency, independent establishment, corporation wholly or partially owned by the United States, which is an instrumentality of the United States, or any board, bureau, division, service, officer, authority, administration, or other establishment in the executive branch of government. The term agency means the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. I wonder how many American people even know that there is such a thing within the government, that there is a United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. It's never discussed in the media, but nevertheless it does exist, and it exists to this very day. Title II, Organization. There is hereby established an agency to be known as the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. The agency shall be headed by a director who shall serve as the principal advisor to the Secretary of State and the President on arms control and disarmament matters. In carrying out his duties under this Act, the director shall, under the direction of the Secretary of State, have primary responsibility within the government for arms control and disarmament matters, as defined in this Act. He shall be appointed by the President by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. He shall receive compensation at the rate of $22,500 per annum. And I'm sure that they've made that a most lofty position now, ladies and gentlemen. That director is probably making 10 or 15 times as much. A deputy director of the agency shall be appointed by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. He shall receive compensation at the rate of $21,500 per annum. The deputy director shall perform such duties and exercise such powers as the director may prescribe. He shall act for and exercise the powers of the director during his absence or disability or during a vacancy in said office. And I'm sure why all of you may be asking, why do I use my broadcast to read through such mundane things as this? I believe that it's important for everybody to understand just exactly what goes on in their government, how it's functioning, what they plan to do, how they're going about it, what their plans and what their intentions are. And as the old saying goes, ladies and gentlemen, ignorance of the law is no excuse, as they like to say. So I'm going to bring to this broadcast, and hopefully many millions of people in the United States and around this world, the laws that they are trying to work to enact its full provisions. Section 24. Not to exceed 4 assistant directors may be appointed by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. They shall receive compensation at the rate of $20,000 per annum. They shall perform such duties and exercise such powers as the director may prescribe. Bureaus, offices, and divisions. Section 25. The director, under the direction of the Secretary of State, may establish within the agency such bureaus, offices, and divisions as he may determine to be necessary to discharge his responsibilities under this Act, including but not limited to an office of the General Counsel. The President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, may appoint a General Advisory Committee of not to exceed 15 members to advise the Director on arms control and disarmament policy and activities. The President shall designate one of the members as a chairman. The members of the committee may receive the compensation and reimbursement for expenses specified for. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, this law was signed September the 26th, 1961. This law is 50 years old, and what effectively it does is it disarms the American people on paper. They are working in stages to enact every provision of this law. The members of the committee may receive the compensation and reimbursement for expenses specified for. Consultants by Section 41D of this Act. The committee shall meet at least twice each year. It shall from time to time advise the President, the Secretary of State, and the Disarmament Director respecting matters affecting arms control, disarmament, and world peace. Functions. The Director is authorized and directed to exercise his powers in such manner as to ensure the acquisition of a fund of theoretical and practical knowledge concerning disarmament. To this end, the Director is authorized and directed under the direction of the President, 1. To ensure the conduct of research, development, and other studies in the field of arms control and disarmament. 2. To make arrangements, including contracts, agreements, and grants, for the conduct of research, development, and other studies in the field of arms control and disarmament by private or public institutions or persons. And 3. To coordinate the research, development, and other studies conducted in the field of arms control and disarmament by or for other government agencies in accordance with procedures established under Section 35 of this Act. In carrying out his responsibilities under this Act, the Director shall, to the maximum extent feasible, make full use of available facilities, government and private. The authority of the Director with respect to research development, and other studies shall be limited to participation in the following insofar as they relate to arms control and disarmament. A. The detection, identification, inspection, monitoring, limitation, reduction, control, and elimination of armed forces and armaments, including thermonuclear, nuclear, missile, conventional, bacteriological, chemical, and radiological weapons. When they're talking about conventional weapons, ladies and gentlemen, they include your firearms as a conventional weapon. They include your firearms as a small arm. D. The control, reduction, and elimination of armed forces and armaments in space, in areas on and beneath the Earth's surface, and in underwater regions. The structure and operation of international control and other organizations useful for arms control and disarmament. And there again, ladies and gentlemen, that is why the federal government, with Hillary Clinton, the great socialist Secretary of State, taking the lead, they are trying to use international agencies for the international control and other organizations useful for arms control and disarmament. Section F, the training of scientists, technicians, and other personnel for manning the control systems which may be created by international arms control and disarmament agreements. Reduction and elimination of the danger of war resulting from accident, miscalculation, or possible surprise attack, including but not limited to improvements in the methods of communications between nations. The economic and political consequences of arms control and disarmament, including the problems of readjustment arising in industry and the reallocation of national resources. The arms control and disarmament implications of foreign and national security policies of the United States with a view to a better understanding of the significance of such policies for the achievement of arms control and disarmament. The national security and foreign policy implications of arms control and disarmament proposals with a view to a better understanding of the effect of such proposals upon national security and foreign policy. Methods for the maintenance of peace and security during different stages of arms control and disarmament. You see, they do have stages, as I said in State Department's publication 7277. They outline disarmament in 3 stages. And as you may be wondering, why am I rehashing all of this? Because I believe it's very important. Instead of mourning for these people in Connecticut and reaching out to the families that lost their children, our crooked, lying and deceiving and manipulating politicians will use this incident like they'll use every other incident that happened before and that will still happen to push for more gun control laws, because they are using this as a pretext to disarm the American people. And I have the law, and I'm reading it to you right here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm reading it to you word by word, as it was signed September the 26th, 1961. All research within the United States contracted for, sponsored, co-sponsored, or authorized under authority of this Act shall be provided for in such manner that all information as to uses, products, processes, patents, and other developments resulting from such research developed by government expenditures will, with such exceptions and limitations, if any, as the Director may find to be necessary in the public interest, be available to the general public. This subsection shall not be construed as to deprive the owner of any background patent relating thereto of such rights as he may have thereunder. The Director is authorized and directed to prepare for the President, the Secretary of State, and the heads of such other government agencies as the President may determine, recommendations concerning United States arms control and disarmament policy, provided, however, that no action shall be taken under this or any other law that will obligate the United States to disarm or to reduce or to limit the armed forces or armaments of the United States, except pursuant to the treaty-making power of the President under the Constitution, or unless authorized by further affirmative legislation by the Congress of the United States. So you see here, ladies and gentlemen, we've got lots of doublespeak in Section 33 of this law. First, it says that no action shall be taken under this or any other law that will obligate the United States to disarm. But then in another sentence, except under the treaty-making power of the President or under affirmative legislation by the Congress of the United States. Do you see how these people operate, America? Are you getting the drift? They speak out of both sides of their mouths. They fully intend to disarm the American people, and they fully intend to disband our armed forces. That is why they place people, our men, our fighting men and women, in wars which they have no hope of ever winning. They not only demoralize our troops fighting in these wars, but they might prevent many tens of thousands of young men and women from entering the armed services to begin with, because they can see, looking from the inside out, just exactly what's happening to our soldiers that are fighting in Afghanistan, our soldiers that are still fighting in Iraq, and the soldiers that are about to fight when we go to war with Iran. Under the direction of the Secretary of State, A, the Director, for the purpose of conducting negotiations concerning arms control and disarmament, or for the purpose of exercising any other authority given him by this Act, may one consult and communicate with or direct the consultation and communication with representatives of other nations or of international organizations, and 2, communicate in the name of the Secretary with diplomatic representatives of the United States in this country and abroad. B, the Director shall perform functions pursuant to Section 2C of Reorganization Plan 8 of 1953 with respect to providing to the United States Information Agency official United States positions and policy on arms control and disarmament matters for dissemination abroad. C, the Director is authorized, 1, to formulate plans and make preparations for the establishment, operation, and funding of inspection and control systems which may become part of the United States arms control and disarmament activities, and 2, as authorized by law, to put in effect, direct, or otherwise assume United States responsibility for such systems. Section 35. The President is authorized to establish procedures to 1, assure cooperation, consultation, and a continuing exchange of information between the agency and the Department of Defense, the Atomic Energy Commission, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and other effective government agencies in all significant aspects of United States arms control and disarmament policy, and related matters including current and prospective policies, plans, and programs. 2, resolve differences of opinion between the Director and such other agencies which cannot be resolved through consultation. And 3, provide for presentation to the President of recommendations of the Director with respect to such differences, when such differences involve major matters of policy and cannot be resolved through consultation. Title 4. General Provisions. In the performance, Section 41. In the performance of his functions, the Director is authorized to A, utilize or employ the services, personnel, equipment, or facilities of any other government agency with the consent of the agency concerned, to perform such functions on behalf of the agency as may appear desirable. It is the intent of this section that the Director rely upon the Department of State for general administrative services in the United States and abroad to the extent agreed upon between the Secretary of State and the Director. Any government agency is authorized, notwithstanding any other provision of law, to transfer to or to receive from the Director, without reimbursement, supplies and equipment other than administrative supplies or equipment, Transfer of receipt of excess property shall be in accordance with the provisions of the Federal Property and Administrative Service Act of 1949 as amended. B. Appoint officers and employees, including attorneys for the agency, in accordance with the civil service laws and fix their compensation in accordance with the Classification Act of 1949 as amended. C. Enter into agreements with other government agencies, including the military departments, through the Secretary of Defense, under which officers or employees of such agencies may be detailed to the agency for the performance of service pursuant to this Act, without prejudice to the status or advancement of such officers or employees with their own agencies. D. Procure services of exports and consultants or organizations thereof, including stenographic reporting services, as authorized by Section 15 of the Act of August 2, 1946, at rates not to exceed $100 per diem for individuals, and to pay in connection therewith travel expenses of individuals, and concluding transportation and per diem in lieu of subsistence while away from their homes or regular places of business, as authorized by Section 5 of said Act, as amended, provided that no such individual shall be employed for more than 100 days in any fiscal year, unless the President certifies that employment of such individual in excess of such number of days is necessary in the national interest, and provided further that such contracts may be renewed annually. E. Employ individuals of outstanding ability without compensation in accordance with the provisions of Section 710B of the Defense Production Act of 1950 as amended, and regulations issued thereunder. Establish advisory boards to advise with and make recommendations to the Director of the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Policy and Activities. The members of such boards may receive the compensation and reimbursement for expenses specified for consultants by Section 41D of this Act. Delegate as appropriate to the Deputy Director or other officers of the agency any authority conferred upon the Director by the provisions of this Act. And H. Make, promulgate, issue, rescind, and amend such rules and regulations as may be necessary or desirable to the exercise of any authority conferred upon the Director by the provisions of this Act. Section 42. The Secretary of State may authorize the Director to exercise with respect to Foreign Service Reserve officers and Foreign Service staff, officers, and employees appointed or employed for the agency the following authority. 1. The authority available to the Secretary of State under the Foreign Service Act of 1946 as amended. 2. The authority available to the Secretary under any provision of law pertaining specifically or generally applicable to such officers or employees. And 3. The authority of the Board of Foreign Service pursuant to the Foreign Service Act of 1946 as amended. And I'm going to go down and see if I can't find what else I want to talk about, because I know that a lot of this can get so boring, and I'm going to try to find what I want to find, and I believe that that is it. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, I've read to you the law that was signed in 1961 by President Kennedy. And how am I connecting this with these school shootings and all of this rampage in the United States? Well, we talked about MK Ultra and mind control. In 1933, when Adolf Hitler didn't get the power that he desired, he burned the Reichstag to the ground and he blamed his political enemies. And he went and told the German people that if you just give me the power, that I will make things all right, and I will make you safe, and I will make you secure. The politicians that are running our government today will use this tragedy, and they will say the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. They will come out in the media and they will get the grieving mothers, the distraught fathers, the crying children that lost their siblings, and they will parade them all over the television set and in the media. And they will tell the American people, give us the power, and we will make you safe and secure, and nothing can be further from the truth. Because they're working towards a one-world socialist totalitarian government. And disarmament and arms control is a central goal, a central policy of the United States Senate, the United States House of Representatives, and it's a central policy of the executive branch of the United States government. How long will it be before they accomplish all of this? I cannot say. I don't have a crystal ball. But they are working towards it. And someday, if we don't wake up, they're going to be able to accomplish their goals. Just by finding an act like this in the federal code book shows, to me anyway, and it should show all of you, that these people are treasonous, that they're liars, and they've been deceiving the American people for many decades. How many people in the United States know that there is an arms control and a disarmament agency? I bet if I put a poll online and asked 10,000 people a simple question, do you know that there is a United States arms control and a disarmament agency? I bet 100 out of that 10,000 will answer in the affirmative. The American people don't even know this exists. It's been hidden and kept from them, kept from all of us, ever since that this law was enacted and signed by President Kennedy. At one time, America, it was totally legal to buy arms and ammunition through the mail. That is up until 1968, when Lyndon Johnson signed what is known as the Gun Control Act of 1968. But do you know the facts and the history behind it? The Gun Control Law of 1968 is almost word for word the Nazi gun law of 1935. The act was brought here by Senator Norman Dodd, one of the judges that sat at the Nuremberg trials after World War II. He was the father of Senator, now retired, Christopher Dodd of Connecticut. Christopher Dodd of Connecticut was also very rabidly anti-gun. And how convenient, one of the worst mass shootings of innocent little children happened to occur in the state where both of these men have resided. Everything happens in stages, ladies and gentlemen. They chip away piece by piece, bit by bit, little by little, slowly but surely. You know, I went to gun stores in my hometown, and I purchased firearms and ammunition. And I've seen other people purchase arms and ammunition, and then when you go to the counter to purchase your weapon, you fill out your paper, and then they call into the system. And then I hear people making comments that, oh, that's a good thing, we're going to keep firearms and we're going to keep ammunition out of the hands of people that shouldn't have it. Well, I fail to see how having your rights violated by the government keeps arms and ammunition out of people's hands who shouldn't have them in the first place. My brother, I will not mention his name, because I don't feel that it's anybody's business. Served proudly in the United States Armed Forces. Served in the United States Army. He was discharged in February. In November, deer hunting is a big thing here in my home state. And having just got back a few months before, he went here recently, before season started, to purchase a firearm. He went to the store to buy his weapon, filled out his paperwork, and his purchase was delayed. And according to him, and I'm not going to vouch for this totally, but according to him, what he told me, that he was on a terrorist watch list, and his purchase was delayed. He eventually got his firearm, but it wasn't until a week after he was able to pick it up. You see, because communists like President Barack Obama are trying to keep arms and ammunition out of the hands of the people that really need it and can utilize it the most, meaning our armed service members. And I find it very despicable, very saddening, and very disheartening that this happened to him, and it's probably happened to countless other service members all over the United States of America. And what we are going to do, as I said, we're going to go through a refresher course here tonight. We're going to go to another one of my documents, and I'm going to talk about something else that I feel is very important. And if you bear with me, I'm going to try to bring this up. I'm going to minimize my toolbar here so I can work a little bit easier. Excuse me for that, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to bring up another document that we are going to talk about that I don't believe that I've mentioned and talked to you about before. We're going to have to zoom in as close as we can. And this comes from the United States Congressional Record. And its remarks by the Honorable Lawrence H. Smith on international treaties and United Nations Charter threaten United States domestic laws. And why am I bringing this up? Because I believe that it's very important because of the push for the UN Small Arms Treaty, and they will push this through the Senate, I believe, eventually. And if they can't get it through the Senate, I believe that Barack Obama will bypass the Senate and they will pass it anyway through executive decree. This is the extension of remarks of the Honorable Lawrence H. Smith of Wisconsin in the House of Representatives. We're going to go right down as close as we can so everybody can see it. Monday, July the 30th, 1951. Mr. Smith of Wisconsin. Mr. Speaker, as part of my remarks, I am including in a news article that appeared in the Washington Times-Herald on Sunday, July 29th, written by Mr. Chesley Manley of the Chicago Tribune Press Service, in which he refers to an article by Oscar Schrachter, Deputy Director of the United Nations Legal Department, which declares in effect that the United States domestic laws are subject to treaties entered into by the United States with foreign governments. Mr. Speaker, there is a dangerous move on the part of those who believe in world government, for it deprives the citizens of this country of protection under our basic laws. I commend this article to all who are interested in this highly controversial question. United States laws may yield to charter, says UN Ambassador. New York, July the 26th. Revolutionary theory that American courts are obliged to give effect to the human rights provisions of the United Nations Charter as the supreme law of the land, notwithstanding any conflicting domestic laws, is upheld by Oscar Schlachter, Deputy Director of the UN Legal Department. Schlachter's views are expressed in an article in the Vanderbilt Law Review in which he defends a California appellate court decision declaring the state's Allen land ownership law invalid because it discriminated against Japanese and violated the UN Charter. The UN lawyer, an American, emphasizes that the views expressed in the Law Review article are his own and do not necessarily reflect the official opinion of the UN. Socialistic state feared. Although Schlachter does not share the fears of American Bar Association leaders regarding the dangers of lawmaking by treaty, he fully agrees with their contention that this can and is being done in the name of the external obligations already assumed by, let me get back up here, assumed by the United States or now under consideration in the UN. Frank E. Holman of Seattle, former president of the ABA, maintains that the proposed UN Covenant on Human Rights would transform the United States into a socialistic state. Carl B. Ricks of Milwaukee, another former president of the ABA and more recently chairman of the Committee on Peace and Law through the UN, declares in a discussion of the proposed covenant that the road to federal absolution is being made very, very easily. Article 33 of the UN Charter declares that the organization shall promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. Article 55 declares that all UN members pledge themselves to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the organization for the achievement of the purposes set forth in Article 55. Many authorities have maintained that these provisions impose no legal obligations upon UN members. These authorities have characterized the human rights provision as guiding principles or general purposes to be observed by UN members. The General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council, which are the UN organs principally concerned with human rights, have no compulsory powers. They make recommendations which have no obligatory effect. Moreover, Article 2, Section 7 of the Charter expressly forbids the UN to interfere in matters which are essentially within the domestic discretion of any member. Schlachter makes short shrift of these arguments. He maintains that the pledge made by UN members in Article 56 was intended to constitute a legal commitment on their part. It is, after all, a commonplace in international law that states assume duties of a legal character which are not enforceable by international organs, he writes. Having satisfied himself that Article 56 imposes a legal duty upon member states in regard to human rights, Schlachter considers the question whether that obligation under the American Constitution is a direct source of law for American courts. He concludes that it is. Supremacy Clause cited. The supremacy clauses of the Constitution is, quote, not rendered nugatory because the treaty provision does not specify the type of action which the courts may take in carrying out the obligation, he asserts. The supremacy clause is contained in Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution, which provides that all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Schlachter cites the California Appellate Court decision as an illustration of practical judicial action to give effect to the Charter provisions under the Supremacy Clause, he declares. The statute denying persons the right to own land because of race would have to yield to the treaty and hence be declared invalid. Another compelling example would be presented where a court is requested to enforce a private agreement which it clearly considers contrary to recognized rights and freedoms. In the case, the charter provision would reasonably include the duty to withhold the judicial action requested. Schlachter writes. In a footnote, he recalls that the United States Supreme Court in Shelley against Kramer, decided in 1948, denied enforcement of restrictive real estate covenants based on racial discrimination and being contrary to constitutional guarantees. Schlachter writes that it would be most difficult to conclude that the Charter prevails on human rights cannot legitimately be given effects by the courts in appropriate cases. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, they've been trying to use the United Nations Charter and their treaty-making power by the President to run roughshod over the Constitution and the rights of the American people. And we are going to go to the documentation again, because I believe that it's very important that we keep up with all of this. And I have to go back down, and if you'll excuse me a minute, I have to go through as quick as possible to bring up another document that we will talk about. And bear with me, I'm slow at this. And I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding. I have another document that we have not discussed, which I believe it's very important that we do. And we're going to bring it up. For those of you that don't believe that they're working to disarm us, I came across a very interesting document on the internet that I posted on Scribd. And it is an essay on disarmament. And it was done in United States War College. See, the concept of disarmament is taught to every high-ranking military officer in the United States of America. What we have here. This paper is an individual effort on the part of a student at the U.S. Army War College. It is furnished without comment by the college for such benefit to the user as may accrue. Disarmament begins tomorrow. Are we ready? By William R. Hahn, Lieutenant Colonel, Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army War College, Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. And this was the first copy of 12 copies. Disarmament begins tomorrow. Are we ready? By Lieutenant Colonel William R. Hahn, Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army War College, Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, February 18th, 1966. Rationally, disarmament could not begin tomorrow because the U.S. is currently involved in fighting a conflict, has active treaty commitments around the world, and maintains a deterrence against current threats to our national security. As the fear of world destruction from nuclear weapons grew in the late 1950s, statesmen and scholars turned their attention toward the utopian general and complete disarmament. In 1962, both the U.S. and USSR presented draft proposals for general and complete disarmament under strict international control to the UN and the 18-Nation Disarmament Committee in Geneva for consideration. The U.S. proposal is an outline treaty which provides for across-the-board disarmament in 3 stages. Stage 1 calls for a 30% reduction in 3 years, Stage 2 a 35% further reduction in 3 years, and Stage 3 the remainder in 3 to 10 years. The great magnitude and complexity of the planning and world organization and direction required to implement the proposal are major factors that preclude the initiation of disarmament even with a willing East. To support the long-range planning necessary ultimately to achieve general and complete disarmament, the U.S. must support international thinking, a degree of international government and law, and a UN peace force capable of keeping the peace. In spite of all efforts of the U.S. and other members of the UN in this direction, the anticipated results will not permit a lessening of U.S. military commitments in the 1970s. The title alone should evoke a variety of remarks such as, how can we think of disarmament when there is a war in being and in no peace in sight? Or how idealistic can you get? Or even, this writer is with it. We hate all war, not to mention the personal inconveniences that go with it. Undoubtedly, there are other thoughts. Each is developed from one's heartfelt conception of disarmament, and perhaps less on a factual knowledge of the subject. In any event, with the world military situation as it is today, the sound practical point is that disarmament cannot begin tomorrow or next month or even next year. In fact, as disarmament concerns the 2 major military powers and their closest contenders, it is years away from realization. The subject is raised herewith because of its place in the announced objectives of the United States, its military implication with our national security, its popularity with many of the nations of the world, including the communist-oriented, and yet the world's failure to have much to show for its ardor. We do not have to go far back in history to find a peace conference that Nicholas II, Tsar of Russia, called in 1898 for the purpose of convincing the attending European nations to disarm. He was fearful that the rising nation would surpass Russia in military might and threaten his realm. Apparently his mistrust was shared by each nation, with its final analysis decide to keep its military arms to meet issues impossible of political or diplomatic resolution. The conference was completely unsuccessful. Nevertheless, the international system remained balanced, stable, and enduring, and the storms of mistrust were taken care of through the operations of the gold standard, the market system, private enterprises, military defenses, and the basic politics of representative governments. After both world wars, the vanquished were disarmed, and the victors individually reduced their arms to varying degrees. Nation talked arms reduction and arms control without any reduction became a favorite topic for writers. The preamble to the United Nations Charter emphasizes the consideration of all measures for strengthening the peace to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It was most appropriate that the first resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1946 called for the elimination under effective international control of all atomic weapons and the use of atomic energy for exclusively peaceful purposes. The United States proposed under the Baruch Plan to destroy its few atomic weapons and to place the development and control of atomic materials under the international authority of the UN. Hindsight tells us that the atomic disarmament Hindsight tells us that the atomic disarmament was not most feasible technically at that time, but it was not politically palatable to the USSR. As the arms race continued into the late 1950s, scholars, diplomats, and politicians began to advance the thesis of complete and general disarmament. In presenting the subject to the U.S. Senate in 1959, then Senator Hubert Humphrey advanced the point that he did not see why disarmament and defense cannot be made the inseparable twins of national security policy. In 1960, the United Nations unanimously resolved the general and complete disarmament was the major goal in achieving world peace. It considered the lesser objective of arms control as only a collateral measure. Disarmament seminars and symposiums sponsored by educational institutions and contractors became increasingly popular, and the scholarly dissertations on the possibilities of nuclear war and arms control came off the presses by the carload. One publication sold 50,000 copies instead of the 3,000 you might have expected for such a scholarly work. In 1961, President Kennedy initiated publicly that general and complete disarmament was a major objective of the United States. In September, he presented in person to the UN General Assembly a proposal for general and complete disarmament under strict international control. One day later, President Kennedy brought to fruition more than a year of planning when he established the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. This event marked the first time a government had set up a full-fledged independent agency to devote its total efforts to seeking a responsible reduction in arms and ultimate disarmament. The USSR was not silent on the subject of disarmament. It became another of the peaceful principles of communist propaganda. In 1961, Premier Khrushchev was quoted as saying, "Comrades, if prevention of a new war is the question of questions, then disarmament is the best way to do it." Both the U.S. and the USSR culminated the work of the preceding years by formally submitting in 1962 their treaty proposals to both the UN and the newly formed 18-Nation Disarmament Committee, the ENDC. Minor amendments have been submitted by each nation, and today these still represent their respective authors. The two draft treaties are similar in many respects and yet widely divergent in other respects. The ENDC, in session in Geneva 7 times since 1962, has continued its attempt to perfect each treaty separately with the objective of presenting finally a choice between two workable treaties rather than attempting an impossible amalgamation. The UN Disarmament Commission was created in 1952, and it has accomplished very little since. Its do-nothing record was assured when in 1958 its membership was enlarged to include all members of the UN. The unwieldy commission has been called into session only twice. In 1960, a meeting of the commission requested by the U.S. proved so unproductive that the ENDC was formed outside the UN in 1962 for consideration of the disarmament proposals. Knowing that the UN Commission could do little harm and might advance red propaganda, the USSR requested a session in 1965. From April through June, the meeting permitted the airing of many positions and opinions not only by the major nuclear powers and other members of the ENDC, but also smaller nations, like Albania and Yugoslavia. Surprisingly, 2 resolutions were passed by the Commission. The first and only significant resolution, according to the USSR representative, called for a World Disarmament Conference to be held in the near future. The second resolution urged the ENDC to resume its work as soon as possible, with priority to be given to a nuclear non-proliferation agreement and a comprehensive nuclear test ban. The Soviet sincerity in the pursuance of its propaganda forays has been unquestionable, and the insincerity of the desire for peace has also been unquestionable. The normal obstructionist activities of the USSR representatives during the past 5 years were broken by the signing of the Hotline Communication Agreement and the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. These arms control measures have been the only encouragement experienced by the U.S. in its disarmament relations with the USSR. Excuse me here, ladies and gentlemen. Gotta get back up to where we were. Now we have briefly traced the course of disarmament as a subject. Let us attempt to reconcile its inclusion in our present foreign policy. Today our commitment in South Vietnam is testimony of the United States' dedication to the protection of freedom, the improvement of the dignity of man, and the right of all peoples to uncoerced self-determination. On the other hand, President Johnson's peace offensive did not truly create a paradox because it is vocal evidence of our desire for peace and our willingness to try to negotiate all disputes. Most of us will want to add the proviso, as long as we do not jeopardize our national security and sacrifice the basic ideals of our national purpose. Well, if we fought for peace and self-determination, uncoerced self-determination in Vietnam, ladies and gentlemen, then why did we end up handing the entire nation of South Vietnam over to the communists anyway? In spite of the few nations with ambitions of territorial conquest, the mistrust among nations is the primary justification for armaments. Switzerland and Costa Rica have views and special situations which have permitted them to rise above this mistrust. These are worthy of study, but not universal application to achieve disarmament. The removal of mistrust among nations is therefore the primary consideration in disarmament. The general idea is to remove the armaments with which a country could not act against another, and equally as important, substitute a peaceful means by which disputes and grievances can be settled. Disarmament, however, is not an end in and of itself, contrary to what many would have you believe, but instead is visualized as one of the major means by which we can achieve a stable, free, and warless world. One of the master propagandists from behind the Iron Curtain ably states that a world without arms and war could launch war against poverty, ignorance, and backwardness. Like the utopian end, the means is a long-term proposition which deserves a healthy and competent research and investigative program. The United States is giving the subject an emphasis which, unfortunately, is not matched by any other nation. In order to continue our analysis of U.S. preparedness to institute disarmament measures, we must determine whether the U.S. has a comprehensive, realistic treaty proposal that could be put into effect tomorrow. In other words, assuming the peaceful settlement of the Vietnam conflict, what if the USSR suddenly announced that it was only interested in peacefully developing its own great society, and that it was prepared to accept the terms of the U.S. disarmament proposal in 1962? Once the initial disbelief has been overcome and the long-standing mistrust of the USSR at least set aside, the USSR, and the UN would be committed to seemingly never-ending negotiations before any disarmament action could be taken. The U.S. proposal, with its 3 amendments, is a comprehensive, realistic outline draft of a treaty for general and complete disarmament. However, it is only an outline of about 30 pages in length, which requires the addition of voluminous annexes of procedures and data that must be formulated and agreed to by all concerned. Since the submission of the proposal to the 18-Nation Disarmament Committee in 1962, the ACDA, with the support of other U.S. government agencies and contractors, has been researching the problems of arms inspection and verification in the warless world environment. Recently, priority was placed on other aspects of the disarmament proposal preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, and the ACDA prepared a draft treaty which was presented to the ENDC in August 1965 for consideration. Realizing that there are complexities and omitted details which do not permit immediate disarmament actions, what is the scope of the U.S. proposal for general and complete disarmament? Briefly, the outline treaty provides for disarmament in 3 stages, with each of the first 2 stages being allocated 3 years for completion and the 3rd stage unspecified. 3, 5, 10 years, or whatever is mutually determined necessary. Stage 1 calls for a 30% cut across the board in all types of weapons, both conventional and nuclear, and for a like reduction in all weapons production facilities. All weapons production facilities. Ladies and gentlemen, all weapons production facilities. All weapons production facilities. That includes domestic arms production. That includes the production of your firearms. And they're succeeding, ladies and gentlemen. They're succeeding. Marlin Firearms is going to close its doors. And as I said in a previous broadcast, Marlin Arms Corporation was bought by Cerebus Capital Management. Cerebus Capital Management principal investors are George W. Bush and George Herbert Walker Bush, the two conservative presidents that were elected to the Oval Office in recent history. And I will repeat what I said. Stage 1 calls for a 30% cut across the board in all types of weapons, both conventional and nuclear, and for a like reduction in all weapons production facilities. As for uniformed men, the U.S. and USSR would be reduced to 2.1 million each, and other specified countries would be limited to agreed levels not exceeding 2.1 million each. Smaller countries would be limited to 100,000 men or 1% of their population, whichever was higher. The International Disarmament Organization is to be established early in Stage 1, and it is to function within the framework of the UN, ensuring the verification in the agreed manner of the obligations undertaken by all parties to the treaty. For Stage 2, a 50% cut across the board of the remaining weapons facilities and personnel is required. During Stage 2, and as yet unspecified UN peace force is to be established, and the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is to be accepted by all parties. The remainder of the total disarmament is to be completed in Stage 3, with the retention by each country of only the national police forces required to maintain internal order and to protect the personal security of its citizens. The UN peace force is to be progressively strengthened until it has sufficient armed forces and armaments that no state can challenge it. There are further requirements that all militarily significant states become parties to the treaty before or during Stage 1, and that all states possessing armed forces and armaments become parties to the treaty before the completion of Stage 2. The organization and direction of the operations, such as general and complete world disarmament, should transcend by far in complexity and time required the demands of any nations or alliances of nations or effort in history. It will influence practically every nation, and the mistrust possible throughout all the stages could become earth-shaking until the 100% nuclear disarmament is achieved. For these reasons, the operation should be the primary business at hand of an enlarged UN organization rather than being delegated to a newly formed agency of the UN. In either event, the people and organizational elements to do the job of an international disarmament organization as specified in the U.S. proposal will require global assignments for a long-haul task of from 10 to 20 years duration. Many of the requirements for detailed planning, including further segmenting of tasks, designation of additional phasing, definition of destruction conversion standards, and reporting will not crystallize until the skeleton organization is on its worldwide stations. Under this U.S. proposal, and even with the assumed acceptance of all conditions of inspection by the USSR, can you believe this, ladies and gentlemen? This was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Armed Forces who is supposed to be protecting and defending the United States Constitution make such an asinine statement under this U.S. proposal, and even with the assumed acceptance of all conditions of inspection by the USSR. Disarmament could not proceed beyond Stage 1 if the People's Republic of China refused to become a party to the treaty. The point is academic, but the fact remains that no major nation is going to begin disarming until its continued national security is ensured. The treaty provides no alternative to unanimous participation, and even then fails to provide adequate protection of the countries until stage 3. It must provide procedures and protection such that partial or regional disarmament can be supported as a beginning. Again, disarmament cannot begin tomorrow because our national security would be threatened. Well, I'd like to ask that Lieutenant Colonel, if he's alive today, when can our disarmament begin then? Who's going to decide when our national security isn't threatened anymore? And we're going to disarm ourselves and give our sovereignty and control over the United Nations. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is an essay written by a lieutenant colonel in the United States Armed Forces. Our armed forces are sworn to preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States of America, not disarm and turn our sovereignty over to an international organization run by a bunch of communist thugs. When are the American people going to wake up? When are we going to wake up, ladies and gentlemen? What really bothers me is this. I can go on social sites such as Facebook, and I have people that I see put up pictures and banners all the time that tell me that I must support our troops. I'll start supporting our troops when our troops start supporting the Constitution. And those that do, my hat's off to you. If you're fighting in no-win wars, I hope some of you are listening to this that are in the military. As soon as you have a chance to be discharged, get out. And get out now. Because you're nothing more than a pawn in the game, as written by a Canadian admiral in the Canadian Navy, William Guy Carr. And in future broadcasts, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very astounding and very revealing lecture given by that man some 40 years ago. And he outlines and details the whole history of what I'm talking about tonight, and he does it in clear and concise terms. And we'll try to get through as much of this as possible yet, because we still have a few minutes left. Two major aspects of disarmament under the U.S. treaty proposal seem to defy solution at the rate and by the circuitous route which the world powers are pursuing disarmament planning. One aspect has to do simply with the overwhelming magnitude and complexity of the organization, planning and direction task, and the other fails to make sufficient provision for the defense of disarming nations when disarmament is less than worldwide. With this situation, it would appear that we have an unattainable objective. In other words, we cannot get there from here unless we change our tack by heading deeper into the wind. Therefore, what actions can we take to pave the way for meaningful progress in this field? First, it is suggested that we develop a more sophisticated public opinion in the world. Get people to think internationally. This is a matter of education and communication, both of which have a greater effect upon people than ever before. Ladies and gentlemen, as a mentor of mine once said, another radio broadcaster, pay attention when little Johnny and little Susie comes home and they show you a picture that they drew. A picture of the world, because they are propagandizing our children, and they've been doing this for decades, to think internationally. And if you have the means and the will, get your children out of the public education system as soon as you can, because they're rotting their minds out with Soviet-style socialistic propaganda. This whole essay that I've been reading to you is nothing but utopian pie in the sky, crazy dreams that are never going to happen in a real world. There will be disarmament. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there will be disarmament. You see, those that love freedom, they plan to disarm. The socialists and communists have no plans of ever giving up their weapons. Why do you think that politicians in the United States who seek to disarm us still want the military and the police to have arms? If there was going to be peace and security, what need would there be for a police officer or anybody in the military to have armaments? It's not about peace and it's not about security. It's about control. It's about total control. As I said, in Nazi Germany, 55 million people dead under Adolf Hitler in World War II. 20 million people dead, Joseph Stalin. 120 million people dead under Mao Zedong. How many more people have to die in this world before the entire peoples of this world wake up to who's actually running our political scene? I can guarantee you that if they don't get the desired results from this school shooting in Connecticut, they will keep going and going and going. They will keep pressing and pressing and pressing. They will go on and on and on until they achieve total gun bans in the United States. Because that is the total goal. And it's not domestic in scope, ladies and gentlemen. It's international in scope. There's a bigger agenda behind the scenes that the majority of the American people are unaware of. Oh, and look what happened. Okay. And I lost my spot. But we will try to find it again. And here we go. Second, we must help develop a deeper faith in international institutions. Here again, education and communication wield a great influence. But also we must contribute our most able people to the UN and support all worthy efforts to the UN. And I lost my spot again, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to get back to it. Third, we must foster greater participation in world government by the UN, rather than allowing it to remain simply a world forum and loose association of nations. Allied with this, we must promote the expansion of the UN's international law activity to include codification of law and compulsory acceptance of decisions. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this makes me sick to my stomach. This was a lieutenant colonel in the United States military that wrote an essay that tells us, thirdly, we must foster greater participation in world government. I submit to you that this man was a traitor. And if you don't think that our highest military officers in the United States are not aware of this essay is taught every year in the War College. And they are using our military men and women as pawns in their game. It saddens me. It should sadden all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Our country is being destroyed. It's being ripped apart economically. spiritually, socially. And the whole goal is disarmament. The whole goal is to place everything under the control of the United Nations. And I have it here right before you. An essay written by a lieutenant colonel in the United States War College. Our men and women that serve in uniform are supposed to be our finest. When they go to battle, we should rest assuredly that they have our best interests at heart. But these wars that are being fought are not wars to protect our freedoms. These wars are being fought to bring nations like Afghanistan and Iraq, and very shortly in the future, Iran, into the international community. These are wars of attrition, ladies and gentlemen. These are wars to reduce their armed forces. These are wars to reduce their populations. These are wars designed to bring about global control. It has nothing to do with our freedom. It has nothing to do with the United States Constitution. It has nothing to do with the United States of America, period. It has everything to do with the New World Order, the United Nations Socialist Totalitarian World Order. And I'm doing my best with my slow little computer here to wake everybody up. Me and the other broadcasters on the network are doing our best to try to wake everybody up. Because there's going to be more wars. As I said, Iran is next. Syria is getting very hot. North Korea, we're still at the United States and North Korea still operate under a state of war, ladies and gentlemen. There was never no formal surrender signed when that conflict ended in 1953. Violence could erupt there at any time. If they wanted people to stop having nuclear weapons, the United States at the end of World War II were the only ones that possessed them. But the plans, ladies and gentlemen, for the atomic bomb were handed over to the Soviet Union by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, ladies and gentlemen, and they blamed two helpless Jews named Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, and they unjustly executed them for a crime that they never committed. As Franklin Roosevelt said, in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, it was planned that way, ladies and gentlemen. It was planned that way. We are, at this moment, in stage 3 of this treaty. Most of the wars and conflicts being fought today are fought under United Nations resolutions. And of course, we're arming the rebels all over the Middle East, which are Islamic terrorist, communist rebels, to destabilize all of those governments so they can eventually topple them. And then they can put them under the control of the United Nations and bring them into the international community. Because they are not freedom fighters that are fighting for independence. They're setting the stage for the Third World War right now. The Third World War that was planned in 1881 by a man named Albert Pike and his cohort in Italy, Giuseppe Mazzini, and I have plenty of documentation on that, ladies and gentlemen, and as I said in a subsequent forthcoming broadcast, I'm going to give you that proof by an admiral from the Canadian Navy. We're in the fourth quarter of the ball game, and time is starting to run out on us. I'm doing my best, as I said, to try to wake people up. There are a great many people that are operating not only here in the United States, but in the world, doing their part. And I want to remind you something, that people like me and other broadcasters do this at great risk to our personal safety and our personal security. Because there will come a time in the United States when people like me will be branded a terrorist. And that day is coming, because they've already, in some circles of the government, labeled gun owners as terrorists, labeled militia members as terrorists. Anybody that believes in the Bible, the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, anybody that believes in freedom whatsoever, you are branded a terrorist. We are living in the days of Nazi Germany, when Adolf Hitler started to consolidate his power. It's happening right here, right in front of you now. History repeats itself. There are only two views of history. One is that history is a series of accidental events with no apparent rhyme or reason. And the second view of history is that everything is a carefully laid out and planned series of events for a particular purpose. And I submit to you that I believe in the second view of history, that history is a series of well-laid and carefully planned events for a particular purpose. And that purpose, as I said before, is to create a socialist world, totalitarian government with the United Nations in total control over every aspect of everybody's life. And we're standing at the crossroads of history. There's one path that leads to freedom, and there's one path that leads to slavery. And I'm giving you the documentation for the whole world to see. That we need to wake up. I'll say it every time on this broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to wake up. You need to start being active in your community. You need to start informing your neighbors. Go to www.scribe.com and get the treason documents. My ID is Silver Saber Wolf, one word, SILVER SABREWOLF. Download them and start burning them to CD-ROMs and start sharing with your friends and neighbors. Good night, and we'll see you again.